The Middle East lies in constant turmoil. Disagreement, confusion, and violence have defined this region for millennia, making this geographic area a bubbling cauldron of unrest, contention, terrorism, and failed attempts at peace. Humanly devised solutions never work here. Events are speeding up dramatically in this area of the world. Beginning with Tunisia and Egypt, nation after nation is seeing protests, demonstrations, and riots. Things are not getting better, but rather only worse. Yet this is but the beginning of the worsening to come. Few understand the historic roots of the Middle East. Their nations, cultures, religions, history, and politics collide with prophecy. How will it be resolved? What does the Bible say? Events in the Middle East carry far greater significance than most even begin to understand. This series will be like nothing you have heard on the subject. It will begin by covering conditions in the Mideast today. This will be followed by the history of the region involving the longest single prophecy in the Bible. It will conclude examining the Mideast's astonishing future.
The World to Come. The Restored Church of God presents David C. Pack, author of 80 books and booklets, editor-in-chief of the Real Truth magazine, read by countless and growing numbers in every nation and territory of the world. In a violent age full of war, famine, pollution, disease, disasters, and economic uncertainty, and ever-worsening bad news, answering life's greatest questions straight from the Bible and announcing the wonderful good news of the world to come. And now, David C. Pack.
It has been said that every 8 years the Middle East suffers another war. Over 60 years of recent history proves this. And this does not count individual terrorist bombings, violent ambushes, and other incidents that always seem to yield death. The Middle East's problems defy a simple solution, but this series will prove God has been carefully guiding events there much longer than any can imagine. The whole world is tied to the Middle East in a remarkable way. The problems there will not go away, nor can the world pretend they will by simply looking the other way. The Middle East is at the center of a powerful and vitally important prophecy the world knows nothing of. But God's plan can be known. We will see God is working out a supreme purpose on earth. Most people are completely unaware that there is a purpose for mankind, let alone what it is. The present and future of the Middle East play a large role in God's master plan for humanity. And this region is at the center of astounding prophecies that will affect the lives of all peoples on earth before this age is finished. Only God can solve the Middle East problem. Over 2,500 years ago, God inspired the prophet Daniel to record a long and detailed prophecy involving many fascinating twists and turns through history. This prophecy will culminate with cataclysmic events to occur in our time. These events will impact all nations, and yet their meaning has been sealed, closed until the last days. Some Bible prophecies are general. Others are specific, or even highly specific. Some involve single events that occur at specific moments in time. Others are fulfilled slowly over many years, or even many centuries or millennia, and involve many events. You will learn Daniel's prophecy involves many smaller prophecies that can be examined one by one until the account arrives at the modern age. This primarily involves examination of one long chapter in the Bible. It will become clear that there is only one way to explain each of the 45 separate verses it contains. The fulfillment of each verse is not subject to human reasoning, opinion, or interpretation. Many of these very intricate separate prophecies have already been fulfilled exactly as God foretold and have taken their place in history. They are now facts that can be studied and are powerful proofs that a supreme being foretold them and then brought them to pass. The connection between the periods covered in this series, present, past and future of the region in this order is seen in its Mideast flashpoint, Egypt. As you watch, see the importance of tying the present to the past and then to the future. First, Egypt's current state. In January 2011, the government of the tiny African nation of Tunisia collapsed, brought on by riots sparked from a single protester who burned himself to death in public in mid-December. This event went on to cause widespread riots in Egypt, a longtime strong U.S. ally of over 80 million people. Protesters stormed the streets of Cairo and elsewhere to challenge the long-standing rule, almost 30 years, of Egyptian strongman Hosni Mubarak. Hundreds of thousands protested. 82-year-old Mubarak disbanded his cabinet on January 28th and appointed a vice president for the first time since entering office. The initial protests escalated to unprecedented levels, prompting decisive actions. Overnight in Egypt, the government shut down the vast majority of Egypt's internet service, only allowing a network used by the stock exchange and most banks to stay live. Former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency and Nobel Peace Prize winner Mohammed El-Baradei, who openly supported the protests, was put under house arrest. Video footage from the capital showed utter chaos. Injured, crying children, a man falling down shot, armored vehicles patrolling the streets and striking people, military helicopters everywhere, authorities firing gas grenades at protesters, mob-fueled street beatings, many fires and explosions. Rioters attempted to seize the foreign ministry and state TV buildings. Other buildings were looted, vandalized, and burned. Prisons were abandoned by guards, and hundreds of prisoners escaped. Museums housing millennia-old priceless artifacts were looted. The picture was stark. Just 18 days after protests began, Mubarak resigned, turning control over to the military council, which within 2 days suspended the constitution and disbanded the entire government. Yet this is but a short chapter in a nation of such long history. To look closely at Egypt is in some ways to look closely at the entire Middle East. The biggest and most populous and most geographically central nation in the Mideast, Egypt's historical role includes many references to it in the Bible. Egypt was the world's first recorded great empire, and it is still the 16th most populous country in the world. History records that Noah escaped to Egypt when persecutors sought his death before the flood. The ancient patriarch Joseph was sold into slavery there, which led to his father Jacob, then named Israel, settling there. Certain historians believe that the patriarch Job, Joseph's nephew, built some of the pyramids. Moses was largely trained in Egypt. An infant Jesus was taken there for protection. Before the Exodus, it took many miracles to break the will of the stout-hearted Egyptians before God could deliver his people from enslavement. Egyptian arrogance caused Pharaoh to ignore all of this and lose his army in the Red Sea as God's people fled under his protection. History records Egypt never recovered. Ancient Israel often went to war with Egypt. The Bible records many accounts involving this country as God's servants and people came into contact with it. Of course, many dismiss such Bible accounts as Hebrew fables. They do not believe the miracles of Egypt or any other miracles of the Bible actually occurred. Even the closed-minded will be surprised at the stubbornness and the power of the facts you will hear in this series. The authority of the Bible can be proven, and you will see this. The Bible also reveals much about Egypt's future. Multiple prophecies reveal that the modern descendants of Israel will again be enslaved in Egypt, among other places. I'm not just speaking of the Jews, the modern Israelis, but of all 12 tribes whose identities can be known. But this is a subject for other broadcasts. The Bible shows that Egypt will play a key role in the fulfillment of prophecy surrounding an entity called the King of the South. At Christ's return, Egypt's stubborn resistance will repeat itself as a type of certain nations that will not easily accept his rule. As with ancient Israel, it will again take plagues and droughts to break the will of the Egyptian people. Read Zechariah 14, verses 18 and 19. Finally, In its latter end, prophecy reveals Egypt will have a special highway built connecting it to Assyria, modern Germany, and running through the reestablished nation of Israel. All three countries are in this prophecy described as God's people. But this has obviously not happened yet, and events today are leading toward other prophecies involving this nation's future. We return to the crisis sparked by strongmen overthrown in Egypt and Tunisia. The governments of many other nations are on the brink. In Lebanon, the selection of Hezbollah-backed Prime Minister Najib Mikati sparked another day of rage. All eyes continue to be on this nation, but also on Jordan. King Abdullah of Jordan fired his entire government because of large street protests all over the country. But serious unrest also involves several North African countries, such as Algeria and Libya. A contagion of protest, revolt, and riot is now sweeping many nations of the world. Even certain American states are seeing the same, and as a direct result, more will soon follow, both nations and states. Let's now go back a few years and review the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks on our way to the present. We will also examine Iran more closely. Let's see why Mideast solutions never work and more about recent events there. For reasons involving religion, race, and natural resources, primarily oil, the Middle East has long been filled with tension and conflict. The basis for a modern nation of Israel was laid in 1917 during World War I, when the Balfour Declaration led to setting the very problematic boundaries for modern Iraq, as well as for what would lead to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Israel's appearance brought a radical shift in the region's power balance, as well as in the attitude of virtually all Arab nations surrounding Israel. But this really extends to every Islamic nation. Since 1948, endless proposals have been set forth intending to placate the factions in the region and bring lasting peace. The Israelis and Palestinians have sought peace for decades, but it has never worked, nor will it. The region's never-ending unrest weighs heavily on governments across the globe. The world's great powers simply cannot look away.
The world to come will continue after this brief message. Discover more from David C. Pack. Visit our website, worldtocome.org. See the World to Come broadcasts. Read and order books, booklets, and articles, all free of charge. To continue learning about the topics covered in this broadcast, visit worldtocome.org today. Now back to David C. Pack.
On September 17, 1978, American President Jimmy Carter negotiated a peace agreement, the Camp David Accords, between longtime enemies Egypt and Israel. This led to the 1979 Israel-Egypt Peace Treaty because Anwar Sadat saw that any peace is always better than war. This treaty was to be a harbinger of temporary better times. The dream of peace flourishing in the age-old volatile region, famous for war, terror, and destruction, was on the path to becoming reality. Or so it seemed. First, Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981. Mubarak replaced him, but upheld the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Each U.S. administration since Carter, to varying degrees, have tried to establish peace. This has ranged from the strength of words to the delicate dance of diplomacy, from economic incentives to political compromise. Diplomatic efforts known as the Middle East Peace Process picked up again in the fall of 1991 and were sponsored by Spain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. The talks focused on cooperation among Israel and three of its neighbors, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, and led to a series of agreements between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization known as the Oslo Accords. By this time, an Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty had also been signed. This occurred under King Hussein, Abdullah's highly respected, very moderate father. But the goals are still eluding diplomats 20 years later. In April 2003, U.S. President George W. Bush unveiled the Middle East Peace Plan, called a performance-based roadmap to a permanent two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Diplomats and journalists called it the Roadmap to Peace. Devised by the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, and Russia, the roadmap was a three-phase blueprint designed to reach a peaceful settlement between the Israelis and Palestinians by 2005. It contained a step-by-step process calling for both parties to take action to reach its objective, creating a sovereign, independent Palestinian state peaceably coexisting with Israel. Soon after the roadmap was outlined, hostilities flared. The 2006 showdown between Israel and the Lebanon-based group Hezbollah continued the cycle. This war had implications elsewhere in the Mideast, including Syria, Iran, and the Palestinian territories. A ceasefire came August 14, 2006. Many declared Hezbollah victorious, as did the leaders of Iran and Syria. Syrian President Bashar Assad stated that the outcome of the conflict proved America's plan for the Middle East is an illusion. In early 2008, 3 years after the roadmap was to have brought a peaceful resolution, President George W. Bush embarked on an 8-day trip to the Middle East. His trip to Israel and the Palestinian territories was intended to continue pressure for both sides to follow through on their commitments to each other, specifically to the first stage on the roadmap to peace. The plan called for Israel to stop new settlements, dismantle unauthorized outposts built by settlers after March 2001, and lift more travel restrictions on the Palestinians. It also called for the Palestinians to disband terrorist groups and to build the institutions of a functioning state. 6 years later, the plan is still failing. Solutions have simply never worked between Israel and Palestine, and they never will. Part of the reason is because of other powers in the region. There are over 200 million Arabs who will not under any circumstance permit tiny Israel to have peace with their neighbors. But the greatest reason lies within how different peoples, Jew and Arab, see so differently their connection to the patriarch Abraham. While governments around the world focused on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, another problem loomed: an Iranian nuclear state. Iran has claimed it is committed to the peaceful use of nuclear technology, while denying enriching uranium for weapons. It maintains that its nuclear work is to generate electricity and produce isotopes for radiation therapy in hospitals. World powers, particularly Western nations, are unconvinced. So is Israel. In February 2010, on the 31st anniversary of the Islamic Republic, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad announced that Iran was now a nuclear state. He told a huge, raucous crowd, "I want to announce with a loud voice here that the first consignment of 20% enriched uranium was produced and was put at the disposal of the scientists." Weeks earlier, in his first State of the Union address, U.S. President Barack Obama promised Iran would pay a price if it does not abandon its nuclear program, stating, "As Iran's leaders continue to ignore their obligations, there should be no doubt they too will face growing consequences." Of course, there has yet come no price, but only more talk. Tension over Iran's nuclear ambition rose with the announcement by its president that he would step up enrichment. Iran is prepared to increase uranium enrichment if the United States attempts to halt its nuclear program. German newspaper Der Spiegel claimed in early 2010 to have access to an intelligence dossier showing the existence of a secret military branch of Iran's nuclear program. Its aim of producing a bomb has reached an advanced stage. The article stated, "Experts believe that Iran's scientists could produce a primitive truck-sized version of the bomb this year, but that it would have to be compressed to a size that would fit into a nuclear warhead to yield the strategic threat potential that has Israel and the West so alarmed, and that they could reach that stage by sometime between 2012 and 2014. The explosive Middle East becoming a nuclear battlefield comes ever closer to reality as Iran, number one, defies global opinion, number two, feverishly works toward atomic weapons, and number three, repeatedly calls for Israel's annihilation. According to a 2008 report, nuclear programs in the Middle East in the shadow of Iran by London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies, more than a dozen nations in the Mideast, just from February 2006 to January 2007, announced intentions for a nuclear program or had restarted dormant programs. Experts report that time is running out for Israel to destroy Iran's nuclear complex before Tehran is able to launch long-range missiles with nuclear warheads at Tel Aviv or other Israeli cities. The prospect of mushroom clouds over this strategic region of the world is terrifying the whole world. With each new round of fighting in the Middle East, the rest of the world looks for a third party to present a solution. This provides opportunities for other nations or groups of nations to demonstrate leadership on the world stage. The European Union began to intervene some time ago, so far to no avail. Let's see more from 2010 to the present. At a January 2010 UN Security Council forum, an EU official statement advocated a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. If there is to be a genuine peace, a way must be found through negotiations to resolve the status of Jerusalem as the future capital of two states. The EU calls for the reopening of Palestinian institutions in Jerusalem in accordance with the Roadmap to Peace. It maintained the EU stands ready to contribute substantially to post-conflict arrangements aimed at ensuring the sustainability of peace agreements. Israel will not agree. One commentator proposed a future role for EU security forces in the region. Over the years, Europe's role as a mediator receded, giving way to an expanding U.S. role in the region. But in more recent decades, European states have achieved excellence in policing peace in many places, in the Middle East, the Balkans, West Africa, and elsewhere. Given the opportunity, Europe could provide the Israelis and Palestinians with the necessary international security that is crucial for enforcing a two-state solution. This portends absolutely monumental, and I mean colossal, implications. Back to the storyline. After Israeli troops raided a Gaza flotilla in May 2010, which killed 9 and further heightened tensions between Israel and Palestine, the European Parliament called for a stronger EU role in lifting the Gaza blockade. A day after Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton gave a chilling account of the situation there and suggested an EU naval mission to help with the transfer of goods. In addition, the EU Parliament proposed international monitoring of the crossings, including reactivating the European Border Assistance Mission at the Gaza-Egyptian border. While the futures of Europe and Israel are intertwined, they will follow very different paths. After 2 years of silence, a new round of Middle East peace talks began in September 2010 between Israel and Palestine. The initial meetings were hosted in Washington by President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Also in attendance were Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Palestinian Authority President Abbas, King Abdullah II of Jordan, and President Mubarak. Participants emphasized creating a framework agreement to resolve difficult issues such as disputed borders, security, the status of Jerusalem, new Israeli settlements, and Palestinian refugee rights. Yet, due to the continuous violence and repeated failed attempts to broker peace, government representatives doubt the process will succeed. Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who lives in the West Bank, said, "I do not believe a comprehensive agreement with the Palestinians is possible within a year, nor even during the next generation." All these events have led more to ask, what does the future hold for the Middle East? Many millions are pursuing a Bible view of the course of events there. A host of terms are now bandied about. These include the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, Armageddon, World War III, a new world order, and the mark of the beast. But what does the Bible actually say? And does history reveal a pattern? Also, other millions wonder about a possible emerging Islamic caliphate, or the arrival of the Mahdi, the Islamic Messiah, or about a final king of the South, referenced earlier. We have seen that man cannot find a lasting solution to the Mideast problem. What does God say He will bring about in this region? Now for just a little of the extensive prophecy in Daniel, found in chapter 11 and concluded in chapter 12. In chapter 10, Daniel is left astonished by the prophecy, shocked and overwhelmed by what God revealed would happen at the end or in the last days. He was so upset, it records he didn't eat for 3 weeks. In reviewing the prophecy, bear in mind that men inserted all chapter and verse divisions of the Bible. While these can be helpful to readers, they can also inadvertently break up longer stories, thoughts, or, as in this case, prophecies. The true meaning and scope of the subject matter can be obscured or lost from view by these divisions. In this case, the entirety of Daniel 11 builds to an unexpected conclusion yet to be fulfilled. Some setup. God gives a certain introductory emphasis to those who read the prophecy, and we need to grasp it. First, God gave this prophecy during the 3rd year of the reign of Cyrus, king of the Persian Empire, centered in modern Iran. Notice chapter 10, verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, his given Babylonian name. And the thing was true, but the time appointed was long. It involved the distant future. And he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. Daniel recorded that 2 powerful kings, actually competing kingdoms we will see to be tied directionally to north and south, would play an overarching role in Middle East events all the way to the time of the end. These 2 kings set the stage for the unfolding of vitally important future events which culminate before Christ returns. 2 key verses set the stage. In Daniel 10:21, the archangel Gabriel speaks to Daniel. I will show you that which is noted in the scripture of truth. Chapter 11 introduces the time setting. Verse 2 continues, now will I show you the truth. When God foretells events, he speaks the truth. They are certain, they will happen. Since no scripture can be broken, John 10:35, neither can any verse of this prophecy. Remember that. Each must stand the test of close scrutiny. This booklet, The Mideastern Bible Prophecy, brings the details of all that this series discussed. There is a tremendous amount to cover, and the remainder of Daniel's prophecy presents absolutely fascinating knowledge. The series will examine it verse by verse, including events to occur in the modern age. They detail the future of the Middle East. Until next time, this is David C. Pack saying, goodbye, friends.
This program was made available by Restored Church of God members and donors from around the globe. Explore our vast library of literature and other world-to-come programs, which are all made available free of charge. To order literature featured in this program, call toll-free 1-855-828-4646. That number again, 1-855-828-4646.
The World to Come. The Restored Church of God presents David C. Pack, answering life's greatest questions straight from the Bible and announcing the wonderful good news of the world to come.
The Middle East has for thousands of years been filled with unrest and violence. Governments inside and outside the region have attempted to bring peace, but have always failed. Part 1 examined today's Mideast, with conditions seen to be rapidly growing much worse. We touched on Daniel 11, the longest unbroken prophecy in the Bible. We will now learn how God has brought to pass many specific events he foretold would occur in this picture of the future written in advance. Understand that for this particular series, more in-depth coverage of history is necessary to demonstrate the Bible's authority, to prove God foretold events before they came to pass. You will see how history presents a pattern for the future. Follow carefully with an open Bible. You may wish to pause, take notes, or even watch the broadcast a second time. You will be astonished at what you learn. We left off last time introducing Daniel 11. Many of the intricate separate prophecies it contains have already been fulfilled exactly as God foretold and have taken their place in history. They are now facts that can be examined and are powerful proofs that a supreme being foretold them and then brought them to pass. The evidence presented serves to make plain the certainty of Bible prophecy, leaving those who disregard future prophecies without excuse. Understand that the very authority of the Bible is at stake in this series of prophecies. If they stand true, proven by the facts of history, then a divine author recorded them, and all other Bible prophecies carry the same authority. If the prophecy failed, then the Bible is a book of men and can be thrown away as not worth the paper it is written on. This prophecy will culminate with tremendous events to occur in our time. These events will impact all nations, and yet they have been sealed, closed until this age. So said the prophet Daniel in chapter 12. Remember again that men inserted all chapter and verse divisions of the Bible. While these can be helpful, they can also inadvertently break up longer stories, thoughts, or, as in this case, prophecies. The true meaning and scope of the subject matter can be obscured or completely lost from view due to these divisions. Remember from part 1, God's strong emphasis in Daniel 10:1 on how the prophecy is true. Get this. Since the prophecy ends with events yet to happen in our time, also get this, we must study events already fulfilled to appreciate those in the prophecy not yet fulfilled, but that will be because of the prophecy's historic accuracy. Movies, plays, and books cannot be understood by entering them in the middle or near the end. This means we start at the beginning. Verse 2 begins covering persons and events that immediately lose the average Bible reader who would have no clue what they mean. But you can understand. History is our constant guide. Now verses 2 and 3. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. Who are these 4 kings, where the 4th is greater than the first 3? And who is the mighty king? Daniel was speaking of kings Cambyses, Smerdis, and Darius of Persia as the first 3, with Xerxes being historically the greatest and richest of the 4. History shows it was Xerxes who did stir up war with Greece. We must now briefly understand verses in Daniel 8. Alexander the Great's father, King Philip of Macedonia, created a master plan to conquer and defeat the Persian Empire with a Greek army. But Philip died before he could execute his plan. His son invaded Persia in his stead, and Alexander's army fought the Persian army at the famous Battle of Issus in 333 BC. Daniel 8, verses 2, 5, and 6 describe it. 2 years later, in 331 BC, in a second battle with Darius, called the Battle of Arbela, Alexander completely defeated the Persian Empire. Having already conquered Egypt shortly before, he followed this battle with the destruction of everything from the Middle East to India. This happened precisely as prophesied. Now verse 4. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. What does this mean? What are the 4 winds, and how was Alexander's kingdom plucked up? Numerous historical authorities acknowledge that Alexander died suddenly at age 32 when, as stated by the famous historian George Rawlinson in his A Manual of Ancient History, which we will quote often, Alexander was cut off unexpectedly in the vigor of early manhood. He left no inheritor either of his power or of his projects. Alexander's kingdom did break into 4 kingdoms because he had no son to replace him. Prophecy was fulfilled just as God foretold. Alexander's 4 generals obviously represent the 4 winds of heaven, or directions to which his kingdom was divided. General Lysimachus ruled Asia Minor. Cassander ruled Greece and Macedonia. Seleucus ruled Syria, Babylonia, and all regions east to India. And Ptolemy ruled Egypt, Judea, and part of Syria. More facts of history. From this point, the prophecy tracks 2 of these 4 kings or divisions of territory. The Syrian kingdom represents the king of the north. The Egyptian kingdom represents the king of the south, because Egypt is generally south of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the central focus of all Bible prophecy, and therefore directions are always established in relation to this city. These 2 kingdoms often fought back and forth across Palestine, the Holy Land and Jerusalem, with possession of this area constantly shifting depending on the outcome of the last battle. Ptolemy I, named Soter, established Egypt as a much greater, more dominant power than when Alexander was alive. Seleucus also became very strong. By 312 BC, he had established an equally powerful kingdom in Syria. These 2 kingdoms became and represent, respectively, the king of the south and the king of the north, mentioned throughout the prophecy. Realize that the kings of the north and the south shift in location much later in the prophecy. Verse 5 states, "The king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion." Verse 6 is a very specific and truly remarkable prophecy. Let's examine various phrases within it. "In the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement." Most Bible margins say rights, meaning marriage union or rights in this case. "But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm. But she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times." What could all of this refer to? 50 years later, Antiochus II, called Teos, was the king of the north, ruling at Syria. His wife, Laodice, carried great influence in the kingdom. But Teos divorced her and married Berenice, the daughter of the king of the south. Berenice was to lose the power of her arm. Her husband, the king of the north, was foretold to not stand, and she and her father, he that begat her, were both also prophesied to be given up. These 3 did come to a bad end. An amazingly detailed, precisely fulfilled prophecy ensues from verse 6. Rawlinson states that her, Laodice's influence, engaged him in a war with Ptolemy Philadelphus, king of the south, BC 260, which is terminated BC 252 by a marriage between Antiochus and Berenice, Ptolemy's daughter, on the death of Philadelphus, he that begat her, BC 247. Antiochus repudiates Berenice and takes back his former wife Laodice, who, doubtful of his constancy, murders him to secure the throne for her son Seleucus II, BC 246. Berenice had been put to death by Laodice. Before reading verse 7, realize that control of the Holy Land shifts repeatedly. Also realize that we're only giving the barest thumbnail of what history reveals. This is because our purpose is to show God inspired these prophecies, not to teach an in-depth history lesson, as could be done. Also realize that God would have to make known from history the meaning of these verses so we could know He is the Bible's author. Now verse 7. "But out of a branch of her roots, Berenice's parents, shall one," this is her brother, who took the throne in his father's stead as the king of the south, "stand up in his estate." The margin says in his place or office. "Which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. Rawlinson brings the names Ptolemy Euergetes III, eldest son of Philadelphus, and therefore Berenice's brother, a branch of her roots, invades Syria, BC 245, to avenge the murder of his sister Berenice. In the war which follows, he carries everything before him. Now verses 8 and 9. And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. This speaks of the southern king carrying silver and gold vessels with captives back to Egypt, his own land, after a successful invasion of the north. In fact, Ptolemy III did conquer Syria, the port of Antioch, capital of the kingdom, and Seleucia. He took a vast amount of spoils, including 2,500 idolatrous vessels and molten images that, in 526 BC, the northern king Cambyses had taken from Egypt. The passage also states that King Ptolemy III would rule longer, more years, than the northern king, Seleucus II. Seleucus died in 226 BC, and Ptolemy III reigned 4 years longer until 222 BC. At Seleucus' death, his kingdom was ruled successively by his two sons. Seleucus III reigned just 3 years, 226 to 223 BC, while his brother Antiochus III, also called the Great, reigned for over 36 years, 223 to 187 BC. Each established great armies to fight Egypt, recover their port city of Seleucia, and avenge the previous defeats of their father. It took 27 years for Antiochus to recapture Seleucia and conquer Syria and the area from Judea to Gaza. Verses 10 and 11 state, "But his son shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up." The margin says stirred up again, "even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler," or anger, "and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand." Ptolemy IV fulfilled verse 11 exactly. After gathering an army of 75,000, he did move with anger against Antiochus the Great. Now verse 12. "And when he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down," that's kill, "many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it." Ptolemy IV fulfilled verse 12 because he did kill many 10,000s. However, he retreated too soon to Egypt, having made too hasty a peace with Antiochus, and wasted the substance he had gained. Hence the phrase, "but he shall not be strengthened by it." That is his victory over Antiochus in 217 BC. 12 years later, 205 BC, Ptolemy Philopater, king of Egypt, died. His baby son, Ptolemy Epiphanes, was given the throne. Thus, Egypt became vulnerable to attack. Antiochus in the north took advantage of this vulnerability after certain years by defeating Egypt. Verse 13 explains, "For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches." Soon after, Antiochus formed an alliance with a later Philip of Macedonia to attack Egypt and retrieve Phoenicia and southern Syria from Egypt. This is a clear fulfillment of verse 14. Let's read it. "In those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of your people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall." The famous Jewish historian Josephus states that a large number of Jews joined Antiochus in this campaign. This is what the end of verse 14 is describing. Again, read each verse from your Bible as these historical events are outlined before you. Let's pause. Many believe this prophecy simply cannot be understood. This is because they can't understand it. These never seem to ask the obvious. Why would God record a long, detailed prophecy or any other prophecy and not want it understood? The answer is He wouldn't. Back to the storyline. Next, Antiochus laid siege all the way from Egypt to Sidon, eventually seizing control of Judea in 198 BC at the Battle of Mount Peniam. Notice the reference to the Holy Land, Judea, as the glorious land, in verses 15 and 16. So the king of the north, Antiochus, shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities. And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that comes against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, again Judea, which by his hand shall be consumed. In each case so far, history records events occurred exactly as God foretold. Now verse 17. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. At this time, 198 BC, Antiochus arranged to have his daughter, Cleopatra, not the famous Egyptian queen of 31 BC, marry the now little boy king, Ptolemy Epiphanes. But this plan to control and possess Egypt through deceit failed because Cleopatra deceived her father, Antiochus, and did not help him take control of Egypt. This caused Antiochus to focus on defeating and taking control of the coasts of Asia Minor, including the islands around it, 197 and 196 BC. However, in the Battle of Magnesia, 190 BC, Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, the Roman general, defeated him and destroyed his army. This is recorded in verse 18. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, that's the coasts of Asia Minor, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf, one of his generals, shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Verse 19 records what came next. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort, or fortresses of his own land. But he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Antiochus, after redirecting his concerns toward his own fortresses, was killed in 187 BC while plundering Oriental temples in Elymas in an attempt to pay war reparations to the Romans. Verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. A man named Heliodorus, the raiser of taxes, was sent by Seleucus IV Philopater to raise money throughout Judea. However, Heliodorus poisoned Seleucus, who consequently reigned only 11 years, a few days, 187 to 176 BC. Antiochus IV, or Epiphanes, Seleucus IV's younger brother, won control of the kingdom by flattery and deceit. Verse 21 states, in his estate shall stand up a vile person. That's Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom. But he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. This man was an extremely vile, contemptible person. In his aid, Eumenes did come to assist him. Rawlinson states, Antiochus Epiphanes, assisted by Eumenes, drives out Heliodorus and obtains the throne, BC 176. He astonishes his subjects by an affectation of Roman manners and his good-natured profuseness, or his flatteries. We now begin looking more closely at the extraordinary role of Antiochus Epiphanes. He becomes an important type of something that will happen at the very end of the age. We can now read verse 22. With the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yes, also the prince of the covenant. This verse pictures an effort by Antiochus Epiphanes to remove the Jewish high priest, Prince of the Covenant. Antiochus' purpose was to install someone who would be loyal to him. Some misunderstand the term Prince of the Covenant as a reference to Christ. It is not. In the context, it clearly refers to the Jewish high priest. Think, for this to be Jesus Christ, all the previous verses must have an entirely different meaning. The next three verses are an insight into Antiochus' character and manner. Verse 23 first. After the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Antiochus started with a small group of supporters, yet through flattery and deceit, he slipped into greater power and secured large numbers of followers. Verses 24 and part of 25. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. Yes, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with also a very great and mighty army. Although Antiochus' ancestors granted favor to the Jews, he swept into Lower Egypt and Galilee, thereby alienating the Jews. Let's read. The Jews were driven to desperation by the mad project of this self-willed monarch, and threatened with war by the ministers of Ptolemy Philometor, the then southern king, who claim Cilicia and Palestine as the dowry of Cleopatra, the late queen mother, Antiochus marches against Egypt. This is 171 BC, when his nephew, Ptolemy Philometor, attacked him with a great army. However, Ptolemy's officers betrayed him to Antiochus and he lost the battle. This is recorded at the end of verse 25. But he, Ptolemy Philometor, the king of the south, shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. In 174 BC, Antiochus had joined his young nephew Ptolemy at a feast. Antiochus feigned support for Ptolemy against his brother Euergetes II in a case of mutual deceit. Read verses 26 and 27. Yes, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, at the feast, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Now verse 28 for what happens next. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits, and return to his own land. This describes Antiochus deciding to attack and slaughter as many Jews as possible. Upon returning from Egypt in 168 BC with great riches, he sacked the temple at Jerusalem and took from it the golden vessels, all as part of his planned genocide of the Jews. Now verse 29. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. History records that Antiochus did turn back toward Egypt, this time without similar success, because Ptolemy Philometor had secured assistance from Rome. Verse 30 adds, for the ships of Shittim shall come against him. That's Antiochus. Therefore he shall be grieved and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. The Roman commander Popilius brought his fleet of ships to attack Antiochus. Popilius secured surrender on his own terms, which included leaving Egypt after returning the island of Cyprus to Egypt. This caused Antiochus to again vent his anger against the Jews as he was returning to Antioch. This indignation against the Holy Covenant offered favor to any Jews who would renounce their beliefs and practices. What follows is fascinating and begins a powerful parallel for our day. Follow closely. First, the crucial verse 31. And arms shall stand on his part, again Antiochus' part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. And they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Note this. Antiochus dispatched troops to Palestine 1 year later, in 167 BC, with terrible results for all who fell in his path. He destroyed the temple and its sanctuary, doing away with the daily sacrifice, described in Daniel 8:11 through 24, while setting up an image of Zeus, Jupiter Olympus, the abomination of desolation, directly on the temple altar. Some try to portray this as having been fulfilled when the Dome of the Rock was built on the temple site over 8 centuries later, in the 600s AD. Again, understand, for this to be true, all the verses that have been explained to this point would require some other equally plausible explanation to work with the precision we have seen every step of the way thus far. This would also apply to all verses that follow verse 31. Were this so, no one has ever seen that other plausible explanation. Why? Because there is no other way to understand the facts of history. At this point, we must break away until next time. The rest of the series completes Daniel 11, but goes much further and ties in the New Testament period, including Christ and the apostles within the prophecy, all the way to World War II and on to the Antichrist, Armageddon, the beast of Revelation and its mark, as well as the modern king of the north and modern king of the south and the final abomination of desolation. Do not miss what is coming. Until next time, this is David C. Pack saying goodbye, friends.
This program was made available by Restored Church of God members and donors from around the globe. Explore our vast library of literature and other World to Come programs, which are all made available free of charge. To learn more or to find a local congregation, contact us to receive a personal response from a minister. The World to Come. The Restored Church of God presents David C. Pack, answering life's greatest questions straight from the Bible and announcing the wonderful good news of the world to come.
This is part 3 in a series examining the Middle East in prophecy. We've covered the current state of this violent and tumultuous region, along with the incredible prophecy in Daniel 11. We have seen history come alive, confirming the authority of the Bible. We saw that verse after verse was substantiated by the provable facts of history, leaving no doubt in the viewer's mind that what God recorded in His Word has happened, and that the rest of Daniel's prophecy will also be fulfilled. There is more to understand in Daniel 11 and also chapter 12. You will be fascinated by more facts of history. We left off last time examining the first fulfillment of the abomination of desolation outlined in Daniel 11:31. We saw that Antiochus Epiphanes placed the abomination that makes desolate in the temple in 167 BC, just as God foretold. We also saw history records this was a statue of Zeus, Jupiter Olympus, placed in the Holy of Holies, the most holy part of the temple. Antiochus' fulfillment of this passage is a crucial type of a latter-day fulfillment to occur in our time. Luke 21:20 reveals Jerusalem will be left in desolation by armies that will surround and destroy it, with this occurring in the next few years. The enormous gravity of this prophecy will be explained later. I will cover in detail the abomination of desolation after this series. It is very important for the viewer to recognize that God often uses the principle of duality to show the world, through prior similar events as types, what He intends to do again, to repeat, invariably in a much greater way in the future. This is an absolutely vital key to understanding the meaning of many Bible prophecies. We return to the storyline. Let's examine the first part of verse 32. It describes Antiochus' attempt to destroy the Jewish religion. Let's read. "And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he, Antiochus, corrupt by flatteries." Antiochus outlawed both the daily sacrifice and the daily ministration of the temple through a system of flattering with favors any Jews who would renounce their beliefs. The following comes from the book of 1 Maccabees. While some Bibles incorrectly include this book as scripture, it is not. It is helpful in regard to history and in picturing the utter depravity of Antiochus Epiphanes. Let's read. "King Antiochus wrote to all his kingdom that all the people should be one, and every one should leave his own law, and should prohibit the Sabbath and the festival or holy days to be celebrated. He commanded the holy places to be profaned. He commanded altars to be built, and temples and idols, and swine's flesh to be immolated, and unclean beasts, and that whosoever would not do according to the word of King Antiochus should be put to death. Then many of the people were gathered to them that had forsaken the law of the Lord, and they committed evils. And every one with whom the books of the testament of the Lord were found, and whosoever observed the law of the Lord, they put to death. The women that circumcised their children were slain, according to the commandment of King Antiochus. And they hanged the children about their neck in all their houses. And those that had circumcised them they put to death. Many of the people of Israel determined with themselves they would not break the holy law of God, and they were put to death." This horrible picture is but the tiniest type, a mere fraction of what will occur when this prophecy is fulfilled again. The next time will be infinitely worse and will involve many more people than the Jews of Palestine. It is critical to understand that from the middle of verse 32, the prophecy shifts forward to the time of Christ and the New Testament church. Notice, "But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits." So far, we have watched each step of this prophecy unfold over almost 2 centuries. The time setting now fast forwards approximately 200 more years to depict true Christians, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Notice again that verse 32 speaks of people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits or great works. Verse 33 continues, "They that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by spoil many days." This describes the period of 2,000 years spanning the entire New Testament era all the way to Christ's return, a time that would certainly be many days. At this point in the prophecy, many theologians and commentaries note that the highly detailed, precisely fulfilled verse-by-verse story appears to come to an abrupt end, but in fact it does not. These 2 portions of verses picture 2 entirely different time settings, the first being a type of the latter. Certainly Antiochus did corrupt by flatteries a great many Jews. The latter part of verse 32 speaks of the time of the Maccabees, who resisted Antiochus' pattern of corruption and slaughter. They represented a type of what Jesus and his apostles would begin to do when Jesus built his church, foretold in Matthew 16:18. Obviously, Christ and the apostles knew God, were strong, and did do great works. Christians are always to be strong and should always be prepared to instruct many because they understand what God is doing at all steps in his plan. Obviously, of course, Jesus and the apostles did instruct many. We saw Daniel 12 specifically records that at the time of the end, none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. The entirety of chapter 12 continues the end-time setting. The latter part of verse 33 is a picture of the martyrdom of Christ and all the apostles except John. Persecution and martyrdom continued into the Middle Ages for God's people. The Church of God, Jesus' little flock, little known to the world, has suffered tremendous persecution through the centuries at the hands of the great false universal church system. one final greatest persecution to occur just before Jesus returns still lies ahead for those true Christians who have grown lukewarm at the end of the age. Verses 34 and 35 are a powerful description of God's people from the time the New Testament church was founded all the way to the present. Notice, "Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Yes, some even get into God's own church who are not sincere. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to make them white." A type of being righteous, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. All of this is appointed as part of God's plan for working with his people. Now verse 36. "And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation," that's God's final wrath, "be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done." This describes the king of the north just before and during the early centuries of the New Testament church. From approximately 63 BC forward, the king of the north controlled the Holy Land, Judea. Each Roman emperor certainly did exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, by requiring all his subjects to worship him, and required sacrifices to be offered to him, like he was a god. Roman emperors did act as though they were gods. They did speak against the true God and persecuted his servants for many hundreds of years. Verse 37, "Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all." This shows how Roman kings prior to AD 476 had worshipped idols. History records that these Roman emperors did magnify themselves above all. Verse 38 describes focus on the military might of the Roman Empire. "But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces." Some Bible margins say munitions. "And a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold, silver, precious stones, and pleasant things." The Roman army did develop into the most powerful war machine in history, and in amount of munitions to use force to that time. And the empire did amass gold, silver, jewelry, and other treasures. From Justinian's reign in AD 554, when the deadly wound of Revelation 13 was healed, after 78 years from AD 476, when 3 northern barbarian tribes had swept into and temporarily controlled Rome, the civil emperors in Rome did begin to honor with power, gold, and silver a god that had been unknown to their ancestors or fathers. This god held a high and very powerful religious office in Rome and received great deference from Roman emperors. More about this is covered in other broadcasts, such as those on the Beast of Revelation and on the whole book of Revelation. These are also covered in my 2 extensive free booklets, Revelation Explained at Last and Who or What is the Beast of Revelation. All our literature on prophecy can be found throughout our websites. For those who may want what is virtually all of what we offer on prophecy in one book, The Bible's Greatest Prophecies Unlocked, A Voice Cries Out, may be ordered. Most students of Bible prophecy remain in near total ignorance of its meaning, unable to recognize the speed, sequence, seriousness, and awesome magnitude of onrushing events. They just cannot untangle the maze of what happens when, as well as where and to whom and why. This book removes the veil of mystery shrouding God's plan and makes prophecy come alive and reveals what lies ahead for all nations before Christ's return. You can order it at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Now back to verse 39 in Daniel's prophecy. "Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange god, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain." Through these emperors, this high religious office did control or rule over many, hundreds of millions, and in fact today over 1 billion, and had great power and wealth given to it. Carefully compare this portion of the prophecy with Revelation 17:1, 4 and 5, chapter 18:3 and 16, and 19 verse 2, where this religious power is described as Babylon, a great whore and the mother of harlots who fornicates with the kings and merchants of the earth. This and related prophecies are also covered in other broadcasts, but in great detail and from every possible angle in the previously described book. Daniel 11 verse 40 states this, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." Daniel 11:40 plainly speaks of the time of the end. It then says the king of the south shall push at him, and adds that the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. What does this mean? Who are these two kings? Who is this end-time king of the south? Some review of history is now necessary. Anciently, this was Egypt. But Rome seized Egypt and made it a province. During the intervening centuries, there has been no great king of the south. However, Ptolemy III Euergetes did seize part of Ethiopia as the king of the south in Egypt in 247 to 222 BC. Both Rawlinson and the Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition, explained that Egypt and Ethiopia were governed together several different times. Ethiopia was the only part of the territory controlled by the king of the south that remained independent until the 20th century. I will in another entire broadcast explain the modern identity of the king of the south, soon to rise on the world scene in shocking fashion and to come into conflict one last time with the final modern king of the north. Once again, only Ethiopia continued and remained independent in East Africa from the time of the Roman Empire. Therefore, no other country or government could fit as the king of the south at that time, by having been part of the ancient land controlled by the king of the south. Remember, verse 40 explains that the king of the south pushes toward the north or Rome. This occurred in 1895 and into 1896. At that time, about 100,000 soldiers under Ethiopian King Menelik came against the Italian army led by General Oreste Baratieri. It should be noted that Eritrea, north of Ethiopia, belonged to Italy, while southeast of Ethiopia was Italian Somaliland. General Baratieri attempted to defend Eritrea against the Ethiopian attack. Over 10,000 people were either killed or taken prisoner. The greatly outnumbered and inexperienced Italian army was almost completely destroyed in a battle fought over rugged mountainous terrain. Italy never forgot this defeat and vowed revenge. It took almost 40 years, but the opportunity finally came. In 1927, Benito Mussolini determined that he would attack Ethiopia in 8 years, 1935, at a point 39 years after the defeat. He followed through, and this did occur in 1935. Again, notice verse 40 in its reference to Mussolini's attack. "And the king of the north shall come against him, the southern king, like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." A whirlwind compares to a tornado, a powerful storm that drops from the sky. Mussolini did in fact bring a large air force to attack Ethiopia. Of course, his chariots were modern tanks and other armaments. The many ships were part of an armada carrying over 100,000 soldiers to the battle. But verse 40 ends with an amazing statement. It describes this large force as passing over. Just as God foretold, Mussolini withdrew and did not finish his attack. This is because God has reserved one final influential and very powerful leader who will arise in Europe and complete the prophecy. We have now arrived at our point in time, today, when the verses that follow verse 40 are those that are yet to be fulfilled. All verses preceding and through verse 40 are already fulfilled and have become established facts of history. May all who read the next 5 verses come to understand their message for our time. My booklet, Are These the Last Days?, proves this time has come. Many Bible prophecies reveal that there is yet coming one final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, when a final king of the north will seize the world stage for a short period prior to the return of Christ. The world is now moving toward this last period of terrible trouble. This dictator will gather 10 other kings, read Revelation 17 verses 12 and 13, who will give their power and allegiance to him in this last revival of the Holy Roman Empire. Verse 41 says of this last king of the north that he shall enter also into the glorious land. This entrance into Palestine, the glorious land or Holy Land, has not yet happened. The prophecy continues, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. Incidentally, Moab and Ammon constitute the modern Middle Eastern nation of Jordan, Ammon the northern half and Moab the southern half. Many prophecies indicate God will spare this region because it is the likely place he will protect his servants through all of what is coming. My unique booklet, Promised Protection, Secret Rapture, or Place of Safety, tells the fascinating story of what God promises for those who obey him. Other broadcasts on this website do the same. Let's read verse 42. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Then verse 43 adds this, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Turmoil in Libya today is merely setting the stage for events that will dwarf current conditions like an atomic bomb, a firecracker. The king of the north will, once again, control countries Italy lost control over at the end of World War II. Note that after Mussolini's invasion, Ethiopia is no longer referenced. Now verses 44 and 45. But tidings or news out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him, the king of the north. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away or kill many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas. That's the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea, in the glorious holy mountain in Jerusalem. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. What could all of this mean? The Orient and Russia lie east and north, respectively, from where the revived Holy Roman Empire will be established in the Middle East. Remember that, prophetically, God uses Jerusalem as the geographic point from which to reference any direction. The king of the north, who will at the time be south of Jerusalem in Egypt, will hear troubling news out of the north and east. Russia, to the north, coupled with many nations from the east, will join the war centered in the Middle East. Verse 45 summarizes the end of this longest of all Bible prophecies. The king of the north, the final civil ruler over the last revival of the Holy Roman Empire, will have, with a religious partner the book of Revelation calls the false prophet, swept into the modern land of Israel, the holy mountain, to establish a civil and religious headquarters. Another prophecy in Zechariah 14:2 declares that the city, Jerusalem, shall be taken. The rest of this verse must be read to fully understand the horror that occurs when Jerusalem is conquered. Luke 21:20 reveals that Jerusalem's future destruction comes from armies that for a time merely surround it. Revelation 11:2 confirms this. This will be covered later in the series. Looking ahead, Zechariah 14:3 continues, explaining what ultimately happens. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. In the end, the all-powerful returning Jesus Christ destroys the armies that destroyed Jerusalem. More about Armageddon follows in part 4. When speaking of the beast and false prophet, Daniel 11:45 concludes, "Yet he, the beast, shall come to his end, and none shall help him." Zechariah 14:3 explains how Christ deals with him and his army, as well as with the false prophet. Revelation 19, verses 19 and 20, and Zechariah 14:12 give more explanation to the terrible end ahead for these two infamous figures. Recall that Daniel 12 concludes the chapter 11 prophecy. Let's briefly examine it. At that time, it says, shall Michael, the archangel, stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. That's the book of life. This is describing the worst time of trouble in the history of man. Jesus described this period in Matthew 24. Then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So did the prophet Jeremiah. That day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble. Christ, Daniel, and Jeremiah all described this worst time ever. Think, there cannot be several times that are all the worst time of all time. Continuing in Daniel 12 and verse 4, but you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. And I, Daniel, heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Daniel desperately wanted to understand what he recorded. But it was not for his time. Only those in the modern age today are privileged to understand what even Daniel, one of the most righteous men who ever lived, and who recorded the prophecy, was not permitted to understand. This series has made plain what vast millions could never know from God's Word until the end of the age. So says God. Daniel 12:10 reveals specifics of God's plan for His people. Many shall be purified and made white, again that is made righteous, and tried by difficult circumstances and hard times in the last days. But the wicked shall do wickedly. And remember this, none of the wicked, those who will not obey God, shall understand. But the wise shall understand. You can be among the wise and know what lies ahead. There are two groups to be tried. One is already taking place and the other is future. The first involves God's people, who are being spiritually purified, made white, and tried now. Their conversion is being purified now. This process continues for some, those who are lukewarm, into the second trial, the tribulation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. And the nations of modern Israel in particular, which we saw in Jeremiah, experienced the time of Jacob's trouble. You have seen but one, albeit a very big one, of the many undeniable proofs of the Bible's authority, fulfilled prophecy. We saw in part 1 that Daniel 10:1 declares the thing, this whole prophecy was true. And verse 21 ties it to the scripture of truth. Each foretold by God, specific event after specific event, spanning centuries, has come to pass and exactly as prophesied. God's word has been shown to be true. This includes the final 5 verses of Daniel 11, yet to be fulfilled. But what will you do about all that you have learned? Your future turns on understanding these prophecies and applying all of God's other truths. We are out of time. The final segment, Part 4, expands on crucial matters merely touched on in the series so far. This includes the awesome good news ahead for the Middle East. Until next time, this is David C. Pack saying goodbye, friends.
This program was made available by Restored Church of God members and donors from around the globe. Explore our vast library of literature and other World to Come programs, which are all made available free of charge. To learn more or to find a local congregation, contact us to receive a personal response from a minister. The World to Come. The Restored Church of God presents David C. Pack, answering life's greatest questions straight from the Bible and announcing the wonderful good news of the world to come.
We have been examining the Middle East in Bible prophecy. This is the final part. In Part 3, we finished reviewing what are now facts of history in the Daniel 11 prophecy. We also saw that its last 5 verses are still future. Conditions in the Mideast grow worse almost every day. The implications, what is at stake for the world, is way beyond what anyone even begins to understand. This includes thought to be prophecy experts. Throughout this series, certain bigger prophetic subjects were touched on only in passing. This was because the purpose so far has been primarily to explain the historical record of Daniel 11, what has already been fulfilled, and thus to prove God authored it. And this lead-up was to demonstrate that the unfulfilled parts of the prophecy are just as certain. Before coming back to the Middle East, we must first bring some important background. We begin with 3 crucial time periods. The Great Tribulation and Day of the Lord together last 1,260 days, or 3.5 years before Christ's return. The others are 1,290 days and 1,335 days. These time periods all have to do with events God's people will be carefully watching for just prior to the tribulation. They begin with different events, but end with the same event, Christ's return. This graph illustrates how these durations of time overlap. Here is a very brief summary. The 1,290 days appears in Daniel 12. From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. These are obviously also literal days, beginning with the setting up of the abomination of desolation. The 1,335-day period is introduced 1 verse later. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. What is this? Since Daniel prefixes the event beginning the 1,335 days with, blessed is he that waits, this involves a signal with an accompanying event at this specific time for which the church has patiently waited. Notice this list of verses. The arrival of the critical 1,335-day moment is something that will only be known to those in God's one church. Real faith will be required. Prepared beforehand, God's people will plainly understand. Miracles, almost certainly many, will have to be involved. Some will be needed just for God's servants from all over the world to gather, let alone escape. We're now ready to examine the terribly misunderstood subject of the Antichrist. The Bible teaches that a powerful Antichrist will arise to rule the world just before Jesus Christ returns. Will he arise in the Middle East? We saw that the beast ends there, but does the Antichrist arise there, and are these men one and the same? What does the word Antichrist mean? Is this just one person? Most are confused. A final great Antichrist is coming. You must understand what this means. Prophecy watchers, popular preachers and authors, and other supposed experts mangle the truth about the coming Antichrist. The appalling ignorance of these confusing, disagreeing voices, all of them is painful to hear. Satan counterfeits every doctrine of the Bible. The Antichrist is no exception. While generally understood to be a figure of horrific evil and a threat to all mankind, the Antichrist is today seen by most to be largely focused against the Jewish people. Based on a completely wrong understanding of Daniel 9, verse 27, scores of millions believe this final world deceiver will make a 7-year covenant with the modern nation of Israel before breaking it halfway through, thus introducing the tribulation for the last 3.5 years of his reign. It is commonly believed that at this point he will reveal his true colors. This entire belief is spectacularly wrong. Daniel 9:27 is simply not describing this or anything like it. But great numbers have come, largely over the last 150 years, to believe this unbiblical nonsense. Here is the great irony. Due to misunderstanding, one school of rapturists is even eagerly awaiting the Antichrist's arrival, practically salivating over it in anticipation because of what they have been told it means for them. Tragically, these are completely unprepared for his coming. In fact, for their coming, because technically, in effect, there will be 2 final Antichrists. Their proper names are the beast and the false prophet. One, the religious arch-deceiver, will point to and underscore the beast's civil authority with powerful spellbinding miracles. In almost all the modern scenarios, however, an Antichrist, the beast, is confused with verses such as 2 Thessalonians 2:9 and Daniel 7:8, which talk about another Antichrist, the false prophet. Understand, most who write about the Bible do not know, let alone comprehend almost anything you have heard in this series. Attempting on their own authority to interpret the Bible without guidance, they ignore its author, God, and seem unable to grasp that he would never leave the most crucial questions, those involving all mankind, open to interpretation. Some preachers do get an occasional stray fact right, but none are able to put all the facts, all the scriptures on a subject together. In regard to the beast and false prophet, almost all have no idea where to look, for what system, in fact the only system that could spawn these final deceivers. They're busy trusting in a rapture and expect to be snatched away, so there's no need to worry. Many others unnecessarily fear they will be left behind, as one popular fiction writer likes to term it, after the expected rapture. Believe me, this author writes fiction. The most basic prophetic understanding reveals that the final 2 Antichrists must be alive today, simply because of the obvious shortness of remaining time in this age. One, the monstrous final beast, is not a single historical figure, such as Nero, Saladin, King George III, Napoleon, Saddam Hussein, or Adolf Hitler, who, it could be said, was certainly a type of the Antichrist. Neither is he Putin, Ahmadinejad, or any of several suggested American presidents. In all of this, everyone is looking in all the wrong places. Webster's New World College Dictionary defines Antichrist as the great antagonist of Christ, expected to spread universal evil before the end of the world, but finally to be conquered at Christ's second coming. Most people assume the entire Bible teaching about the Antichrist is summarized in the belief that an end-time Hitler-like super dictator, the Antichrist, in league with the devil, will arise to rule the world. While Webster's is partly correct, nowhere does the Bible refer to the Antichrist. Most professing Christians do not know this. Ministers and theologians are little better. This booklet, The Antichrist, Who, What, and When, tells the story of this subject in detail. The subject of the Antichrist cannot be understood until first recognizing the plain difference between the beast and false prophet. Again, the beast is often confused, as is sometimes the final false prophet, with the Antichrist. This man will certainly be an Antichrist, but not the Antichrist. Although the beast of Revelation 13 is seen to obviously not be a human being,
the one who leads the final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, the coming union of church and state centered in Europe and described in Revelation 17, will plainly represent the system that is the beast. The embodiment, the representative of the Revelation 13 beast will be a single charismatic figure who arrives on the world scene shortly before Christ's return. This will, of course, be a human being, the final king of the north of Daniel 11, verses 40 to 45. The beast is synonymous with a final Antichrist. This thorough booklet, Who or What is the Beast of Revelation, makes all of this very plain. Back to the Middle East and the idea that the phrase 1 week in Daniel 9:27 refers to the final 7 years or supposed 7 prophetic days before Christ returns. The prophetic understanding of rapture theorists is false. Let's first examine the verse. And he shall confirm the covenant. This is speaking of Christ confirming the new covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he, now it becomes the Antichrist in context, shall make it desolate. This passage actually refers to the abomination of desolation, Daniel 12:11, when occupying armies end the Jews' soon-to-be restarted daily sacrifices at the temple. This is briefly covered later. This verse also addresses the final week of the 70 weeks prophecy and shows Jesus Christ would be cut off in the middle of the week after 3.5 days, actually 3.5 years, of his earthly ministry and mission. The Antichrist, and therefore any supposed 7-year reign by him 2,000 years later, is not the subject. The beast, a final Antichrist, will not suddenly reveal his true colors halfway through his supposed 7-year reign, thus ushering in the 3.5-year tribulation and day of the Lord. Daniel's amazing prophecy in chapter 9 in fact reveals the exact year the Messiah would begin his ministry and how long it would last. It points to one major event that he would fulfill, his sacrifice, as the beginning step in God's plan of salvation. It further shows that the final segment of this prophecy is yet to be fulfilled. Understand, the spirit of Antichrist already blankets the world as mankind continues to rely on itself to bring world peace, justice, and prosperity, while at the same time denying the power of Christ and rejecting his help and rule in their lives. As the end of Satan's reign draws near, the power of his spirit will culminate in the rise of 2 men, the beast and false prophet. Neither will be the Antichrist, but both will embody and represent the ultimate spirit of Antichrist. More religious deceivers will arrive throughout Christendom. Some will perform miracles. One, the last and greatest, the final mesmerizing false prophet, will use great miracles, Revelation 13 and 14, to lead the world to worship the beast, Revelation 16:13. and 19:20. Their deception will be so seductive, so persuasive, so widespread, and so great that this evil tandem will even deceive mankind into fighting Jesus Christ at his second coming. So say these passages. The whole world is foretold in Revelation 16:14 to sell out to these antichrists, and only Christ's little flock of Luke 12:32, his church, will not be deceived and will be protected. Like players on a stage, personalities are quietly moving into position. It is only a matter of time before a powerful strong man with an equally powerful religious figure alongside will stand up to unify Europe and clarify events. In the midst of widespread war and violence, as well as worsening economic and political instability, the seeds of events that will stagger all nations have been planted and will soon sprout. They end in the Middle East. Now let's briefly see what is the final fulfillment of the abomination of desolation in Jerusalem and how it relates to the Antichrist. The first important clue that Jesus gave about this abomination is found in Luke. Let's read again what we saw in part 3. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is near. This verse often causes confusion, with some mistakenly assuming the surrounding of Jerusalem by armies is the abomination. When the verse describes the city being surrounded, it does not say the desolation has happened, but that it is near. If something is near, it has not yet happened. So, the abomination is not Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. These are separate events that occur at different times. Let's read more from Luke 21. Then, what happens next? Let them, all of God's people in context, which are in Judea, flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written by the prophets may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people, all the modern nations descended from the ancient patriarch Israel. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Revelation 11 offers a parallel description from Christ through John of what happens to Jerusalem. Let's read. The Gentiles and the holy city shall they, the Gentiles, tread under foot 42 months. It should be obvious this treading by the Gentiles must be referring to how long Jerusalem is being trodden down of the Gentiles, as Luke put it. Although the armies around Jerusalem desolate the city, they do not stand in the holy place, as Antiochus' statue did in 168 BC. Remember, this end-time event is dual. Two events will occur. One, a blasphemous idol will desolate the temple, or more likely a rebuilt altar. Something must be built in order to have sacrifices. And two, the army desolates the city. Antiochus did both, setting up an idol in Zerubbabel's temple and sacrificing a pig on the altar, and then destroying the city. He therefore becomes an important type for both. Antiochus Epiphanes was a forerunning type of the false prophet, but also of the beast. Also understand that the ultimate fulfillment of the abomination is not only a statue being set up, it is the final leader of the religious system, the human personification of the Babylonish whore, who enters Jerusalem saying, I am God. When the false prophet directs the beast to erect a statue at the site of the reconstituted daily sacrifices, the abomination will officially stand in the holy place. Jerusalem's destruction will then come from the armies that surround it. My next broadcast will be entirely devoted to the abomination of desolation. This event leads us to the much talked about topic of Armageddon. Endless authors have written on the subject, and dozens of movies have depicted the so-called final battle between good and evil. Generals, scientists, and world leaders often use this term to reference the possible annihilation of mankind through nuclear, chemical, or biological means. Some thought Armageddon would be the final battle of World War I. They were wrong. Others believed World War II would end with this battle. They were wrong. During the Gulf War, thought to be prophecy experts were announcing Armageddon is here. Again, wrong, as have been many other scenarios. Surprisingly, the Bible mentions Armageddon in only one verse. And he, God, gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Though the New Testament was written in Greek, Armageddon is not a Greek word. It comes from two Hebrew words, Har and Megiddo. Har means hill, or figuratively hill country. Megiddo is within the borders of the modern state of Israel, about 60 miles north of Jerusalem and about 20 miles southeast of the port city of Haifa. the location of 30 different cities over thousands of years, Megiddo today is little more than a 15-acre pile of rubble on a hilltop. Anciently, this area included a main highway between Africa and Asia. It provided a natural gathering place due to the flatness of the surrounding topography. Let's understand what will then be the world scene. The revived Holy Roman Empire, the beast of Revelation, will have already conquered parts of the Middle East. It will have established a foothold in Jerusalem. This king of the north will invade the Middle East under the pretense of bringing peace. Oil will likely prompt this beast system into seeking control of the region. Notice again what Daniel recorded. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. That's the beast. Remember that the Bible reckons these directions from Jerusalem. While the beast's army is in the Holy Land, other military giants will move in to oppose it. We might ask what big countries today are east and north of Jerusalem. Russia, China, India, and Japan. It is likely that these, with possibly other nations, will compose the massive 200 million man army of Revelation 9:16. Again, all indications are that oil will also be a key factor for this war machine from the east. Ezekiel 25:4 and 10 call this army the men of the east. The world will have come to the point Jesus referred to. Except those days should be shortened or cut short, there should no flesh be saved or left alive. All human beings would be wiped out without God's intervention in the Middle East, but also in the whole world. Now for two of several vital points. Grasp them. 1, God brings certain armies to Megiddo. And 2, the Bible says Armageddon is a gathering place, not an event, and not a battle. Read Revelation 16:16. When the Bible speaks of Armageddon, it is not referring to either the end of the world or the final battle between good and evil, as so many believe. This is critical to understand. There is no battle foretold at Armageddon. What happens is called the battle of the great day of God Almighty. This is God's battle. This last great clash will be fought by armies that will have gathered at Armageddon and then traveled to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Read Joel 3:2, or what is today called the Kidron Valley. This is located east of Jerusalem and about 60 miles south of Megiddo. Thus, the battle does not take place at Armageddon, but at Kidron. Two major forces, the beast, aligned with a coalition of moderate Arab states, and the men of the east, plus the remnant of a radical Arab confederacy, will see Jesus Christ coming out of the clouds. Read Acts 1, verses 11 and 12. When the beast and the eastern hordes gather at Armageddon, the false prophet will feverishly work his final miracles to delude the masses. Considering Christ the greater threat, these armies will unite, forming an alliance to fight what they perceive to be their common enemy. These men will be angry, unwilling to submit to God. Deceived, they will think Jesus Christ is in fact the Antichrist. The result, they will make war with the Lamb, as the Bible says. What will be the battle's outcome? The prophet Zechariah explains, "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east." In the end, the all-powerful returning Jesus Christ destroys the armies that destroyed Jerusalem. Also in Zechariah, "This shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth." In this awful picture, Christ is victorious against his enemies, ending all of man's failed attempts to govern himself. The Middle East was foretold millennia ago to lie at the center of the very biggest, the most planet-rattling events ever to occur on earth. While a very few Bible students know a little of this, they do not know in any detail what these events are or why they will come. Most believe the Middle East should be avoided at some point, but assume the rest of the world will be largely okay. How wrong this is. The end of this age looms much closer. Prophecies are no longer sealed. Their meaning has been made known. The stage is set, and God has lifted the curtain on the future. Certain great nations must be warned while there is still time. So must you. Jesus warned, "For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch you therefore, and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." All these things means all end-time events, those just before Christ's return. It is God's purpose that some be spared, that they escape global calamity. In Revelation 3, he addresses his faithful people. "Because you have kept the word of my patience, I also will keep you from the hour of temptation," or trial, meaning the tribulation, "which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth." God promises safety to his people. Other scriptures reveal God's people will be protected in a specific location. This booklet, Promised Protection, Secret Rapture, or Place of Safety, brings the full picture and a description of those who escape, as well as how these connect to the only church built by Jesus Christ. This series began in the book of Daniel. It was Daniel who foretold that the wise will understand, meaning the subjects of this series, but also much more. Jesus referenced and confirmed Daniel's words. "When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand." This booklet, The Mideast Bible Prophecy, brings the details of all that this series discussed. Beyond all this bad news is wonderful good news. Sadly, few speak of it. Most talk only about the end of the world and the supposed annihilation of humanity. This is because they're ignorant of the most important parts of Bible prophecy. You can know them and you can understand them, but you must study diligently. The capital of the modern nation of Israel is Jerusalem. Though this city has known nothing but war, strife, and bitter division throughout its history, its name means City of Peace. This is because Christ will return there to establish his kingdom. The Prince of Peace will rule from the City of Peace. Beginning in this single city, within today's turbulent Middle East, peace will spread around the world, eventually breaking out everywhere. Read Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, and Micah chapter 4, verses 1 to 4. Final, true, permanent world peace will come in your lifetime. It is as certain as the Word of God. The world will become a perfect environment for all to finally be able to live God's way according to his perfect law, which is the way of peace, prosperity, and joy. Everyone will learn the truth. Isaiah wrote, "For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." A marvelous time is coming. This book, Tomorrow's Wonderful World, An Inside View, offers a picture from God's Word truly beyond the grandest plans of the most intelligent men. The Middle East will soon be filled with peace, and in fact, will be the very starting point for lasting world peace. Until next time, this is David C. Pack saying goodbye, friends.
This program was made available by Restored Church of God members and donors from around the globe. Explore our vast library of literature and other World to Come programs, which are all made available free of charge. To learn more or to find a local congregation, Contact us to receive a personal response from a minister.